Hello. So a very good afternoon to all the participants, delegates and guests here. Professor C.P. Nanda sir, and I'm really indebted to Professor Padi for inviting me to this ICICH conference. And when he asked me to come over, I couldn't say no, because I am a student of Utkal University. I got my PhD from the Department of AIHC under Professor Kishore Basa, who was also a part of this conclave. So first of all, I would like to admit that I am not a historiographer, and the panel in which I have been asked to speak is on historiography. So I am not a historiographer, I am an archaeologist, but I will try to sum up the kind of work that has been going on regarding Kalinga and Southeast Asian connections. And while I discuss some of the more important works, I'll be missing many of them because actually I have not myself read all of them. As she kindly pointed out, that my work is specifically in Bengal and coastal Bengal. I have not worked in Odisha per se, but as I was traveling across the East Coast region to understand coastal Bengal, I have had the opportunity to look at some of the sites. So, PowerPoint please. Yes. So, this is my topic. Historiography of cultural interactions between India and between Kalinga and Southeast Asia. Of course, Kalinga is part of India. Next one. Next one. Yes, so if you can see the map over here, I have placed Kalinga at a particular regional context. Yes, thank you. Okay. All right. So you can see when I think about Kalinga or any other region in this part of the country, I would also like to point out that we can also think about this entire region as part of the Bay of Bengal interaction sphere, a term which has been used by Dr. Sunil Gupta in one of his articles. So it's not just Kalinga that we are looking at, but on the Indian side we are looking at regions like Bengal or ancient Vanga, Tamaralipti, Kalinga, and of course down south you have the Cholas. And the time period that I'm talking about is between 3rd century BC and 3rd century AD. So I will not try to go beyond that. I believe there is another plenary session that takes us beyond this time period. But on the Southeast Asian side, I have actually pointed out an area with which I am accustomed, that is the area of Myanmar, or which was actually occupied by a culture known as the Pew culture, or the Pew civilization and the Mon civilization during the same time period. And of course, now we are getting a lot of archaeological data from Thailand, Cambodia, and also from Indonesian region that connects this entire Bay of Bengal region. Next one, please. Okay, thank you. So when I talk about historiography, the first book that comes to our mind, of course, is Radhakubud Mukherjee, that is History of Indian Shipping. And it is in this book that he talks about Kalinga and quote-unquote colonization of Java. Now in the morning we were discussing about this term. Lalit Mansingh ji talked about that we should discard this term colonization. And of course we have discarded this term colonization, but looking at it from historiographical point of view, if we look at books like History of Indian Shipping, then the term colonization has been specifically used by Radhakubud Mukherjee. Now in his book he talks about these adventurous people from Kalinga who colonized the island of Java, and these people were known as Kalinga. And he points out that this is from the mouth of the Krishna and the mouth of Krishna river and the Godavari and Krishna river. And it is from here that, Pegu, that is Myanmar, Cambodia, and finally Java was colonized, right? And it is during this phase that we also find that other scholars who talk about Indian art and architecture that reached out from India into Southeast Asia, right? However, this idea of colonization, as Professor K.K. Basa has pointed out in his seminal article that he published in 1993, that he talked about this period of Indian writings on Southeast Asia and talked about the pre-nationalist, nationalist, and post-nationalist phase, right? And he talks about the works of R.C. Majumdar. And here, when Professor Basa, in his writings, he has pointed out the post-nationalist phase. He talks about that Southeast Asian region were also acting as agent. So we see that, over a period of time, from the nationalist writings on Southeast Asia, from the Indian perspective, to the post-nationalist phase, there was obviously the term colonization was discarded, right? As we were talking about in the morning. Professor Basa himself studied the glass beads, for example, from India and Southeast Asia, and he talked about the southwesterly trade of the Southeast Asian economy. And he used what is called the world system model and the core periphery model. So, in a historiographic context, these ideas which were introduced by Professor Basa as India being the core and some of the Southeast Asian regions as periphery was quite useful to actually interrogate the archaeological data. At the same time, we have scholars like Professor Ian Glover and Berenice Bellina who looked at the problem from a Southeast Asian perspective, and they asked as whether the Southeast Asians were actually in the periphery or whether they were equal partners or equally participating in this westerly trade of Southeast Asia. And finally, we come to as Professor Basa has pointed out in his writing, that specific regions in the post-nationalist phase, in the pre-nationalist phase and the nationalist phase, most of the writings talks about India as a whole. But as Professor Basa points out, that in the post-nationalist phase, regions are coming up. So it is in this context that region like Kalinga is being mentioned. And we also have this work by Christie, J.W. Christie. It was published in 1998 in the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies. And J.W. Christie talks about, the cotton trade of Kalinga and how the inscriptions from Java actually supports the cotton trade of Kalinga. And she has pointed out several of these inscriptions, particularly from the early medieval phase, and he also says that cling, this term is a blanket term. This is used by Christie herself. She says that the term cling is a blanket term covering all South Asian coming to the Indonesian archipelago. So this is what my earlier scholar was saying, that we needn't look at Kalinga as just a region, but also representing India as a whole, and maybe as a part of a global network, or at least in the network in the Indian Ocean region. Now, from the archaeological perspective, I have several names. I'm sorry, I've just missed Professor Patit Pawan Mishra ji here. That's a typo mistake. I apologize for that. But these are some of the leading scholars. We have Professor Karuna Sindhu Behera, Professor K.K. Basa, and the excavations that have been carried out by Professor Ravi Mohanty and Monica Smith, excavations by Sunil Patnaik ji, who I'm sure will be coming here tomorrow, and of course Sila Tripathi ji. So these archaeologists have now brought up, or they have exhumed a lot of archaeological data from this region of Kalinga, which gives a new light to this problem. So you see that if we look at the archaeological data again from historical perspectives, we see that these are the sites like Shishupalgarh, Radhanagar, then Masulipattanam, Ghantashala, Kalingapattanam, Pallur. So these are some of the sites, and if you read the archaeological literature, all or most of these sites other than Shishupalgarh has been mentioned as port sites. So these are some of the, this is Gaurangapatna on the Chilka Lake, on the right is Manikpatna. I'm sure many of you know about these sites. This is Radhanagar, and I'll be coming back to this Radhanagar site because I have something a little bit to contribute to this entire problem. And on the right, you can see these are the gateways of Shishupalgarh. This is just to give us a visuals of the region. All right. Now, if we read the archaeological literature, going away from the art historical and other literature or literature that deals with inscription, we find that one class of artifact, which is pottery, that is taking the center stage. Particularly pottery like rouletted ware. Now, this pottery, when it was found from various sites, particularly along the east coast of India, it was thought to be a Roman import. But later on, works of Viswas Gokte, it pointed out that this pottery was actually possibly produced at Tamluk, which is identified with Tamralipti, and Chandraketugarh in Bengal. Of course, Dr. Vimla Begle, who re-excavated Arikamedu, a key site in South India, does not agree with him, and she says that this pottery was possibly produced in South India. Now, according to Sila Tripathi, I have read some of his articles, he claims that this pottery was produced at sites like Salihundam, Satanikot, Kesarpalli, and distributed all over the region. So there is, this problem has not been solved. Archaeologists are taking recourses to scientific analysis to look at the distribution of this pottery, and you do find this pottery in Kalinga, Orissa region, as also in place like Sembrian in Bali. One of the sites that you find is rouletted ware, particularly, and several other sites across Southeast Asia. So these are some of the pottery which have been used by the archaeologists to understand cultural interactions. Okay, so on the left you have, this dish type pottery that is called rouletted ware. It is known as rouletted ware simply because of this design, the rouletted design in the center of the dish. But there is another class of pottery on which Sila Tripathi, particularly who's present here, has written extensively, that is knobbed ware. So this knobbed ware, you find them from this early historic context from all over Kalinga region or Orissa region, but you also find them in Southeast Asia from Thailand, and recently from my own excavations in Bengal, we also find this type of knobbed ware in coastal region of Bengal. So we can now start to use pottery as a major indicator of this cultural interaction, right? And coming to the medieval period, one question is always, which has been asked, is whether we are talking about pottery that is possibly traveling from the east coast of India or the Indian side across the Bay of Bengal to the Southeast Asia. But wasn't any pottery coming towards our side? Possibly they were. We are not just being able to identify. There is a site called Kotapattanam in Andhra Pradesh where K.P. Rao has actually pointed out the evidence of pottery coming from Southeast Asia. But I would like to take your attention to this pottery on your left side, on your left. This is called the Martaban ware. Now this pottery was, the photograph was kindly supplied to me by OMCIAS, by Dr. Sunil Patnaik, and there's the same pottery that you find in Burma. But they are not early historic, but medieval context. And on the right side, this is one that was discovery of my team, myself and my team, which we have published in a journal called The Heritage. So this pottery has been found, you can see that with, those strap handles from a site called Jairampur, which is in the Balasore district. And it was a 6th century monastery. There is an inscription from it. But this monastery, it is known for its monastery and its image of Tara, but it also could have acted as a port, because we have found this kind of pottery, which could have actually been coming from Southeast Asia. So I'm not really sure about its origin, but this can be placed under the class of what is called Martaban jar. Why Martaban jar? Because they were produced at a place called Martaban or Muttama, that is in lower Burma region. And now I'm coming to the end of my discussion with 2 more slides. So this is an ongoing research which we have published as in this journal called Journal of Archaeological Science Reports. This research was carried out incidentally with a grant from UGC UP, that is India Looking East, and we received some grant from the UGC in order to visit Myanmar and to study pottery tradition between India and Myanmar. And these are some of the sites from where we have collected pottery, and we have analyzed them by using scientific methods such as X-ray fluorescence analysis, ICPMS, and there are several other scientific analysis that which was carried out on these pottery sherds. We wanted to find out whether the elemental composition, you see every pottery is made up of clay, and the clay has minerals and elements. This is basic chemistry. So if you can match the elements, then you can say whether one pottery moved from one region to the other. This is called provenance studies. So we have actually, I'll be not talking about the entire research, but just I would like to take your attention to these two sites, Radhanagar and Shishupalgarh, which gave us samples for this study, and we matched them. These are the pottery sherds which we got from Myanmar with permission from the Myanmar government. This was done in 2019 from the Ministry of Culture, Myanmar government, and the result, this is my last slide, is quite interesting. You see, number 11 and 12, they are from Radhanagar and Shishupalgarh, and number 3 and 4 are from sites in Myanmar, particularly Baikthano, Shri Kshetra. There are several sites, I'm not going to details of them, but you see how closely they match. The trace element, so we are not talking about only the major elements, but elements which are found in traces. So they match very closely. And we have argued that this is the beginning of this kind of study where we can actually match pottery from regions across Southeast Asia and regions like Kalinga and other regions of India, and we can look at the degree and scale of interaction. Particularly, I have taken the case of potters, because if we go back again, looking at historiography, scholars talked about migration of artists. But recent excavations at Khao Khao by Berenice Bellina, the report is already out. Now they have specifically, that's in Thailand, it's in the Krav Isthmus, they have Berenice Bellina, she has actually pointed out 2 specific regions within the site which was used by the Indian potters. So we can now think about Indian potters migrating, and of course, as I said, we also have to look for Southeast Asian pottery in India, but that can be done only through scientific analysis, because visually at times, common pottery is very difficult to differentiate because they will look all the same. So now we are taking, from a historiographic perspective, more of scientific archaeology is possibly needed. And my last slide would be yes, so migration of craftsmen through Kalinga to Southeast Asia. And then we can look at other objects such as animals like war horses, elephants, going from Kalinga region. In this context, a seal, which was actually published by Professor Ranabir Chakraborty from Chandraketugarh from Bengal, shows the, a horse within a ship. Right? And this kind of movement is not only from Chandraketugarh or Bengal. This could have taken place even from the region of Kalinga. And of course, elephants, because Periplus talks about the big black elephants, which were, important resources from Orissa. Then ethnographic rituals, such as we have Boita Bandhana and Bali Yatra, which should be looked into as cultural memory. And finally, we should also look at if we get skeletons of humans. Now we are looking at DNA analysis. So not much work has been done. So we do have skeletons from Southeast Asia. We do get skeletons from many of the particularly Neolithic sites in Kalinga region. So can we do some DNA analysis and try to see whether there are some matches or not? So I think moving ahead, because ultimately historiography means have to have a critical look at the available literature and to have a chart a course. And finally, I would end by saying that it's fascinating to see that how ancient data or past, how it is rooted in contemporary geopolitical situation, and how we are trying to also invoke the past in order to situate ourselves in the geopolitical region that we are in. And I think that this kind of discourse needs to be done, and this is the way forward in future. Thank you for patience listening.